welcome to Market Savvy Conversations. My name is Megan Walker. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by a very special guest, Tim Kettle, who is the National President of Speech Pathology Australia and is also a practicing speech pathologist. We're going to be talking about the challenges faced by therapists in private practice in these fast-paced, high-demand times. Hi, Tim, how are you?
Hi, Megan. I'm really good, thank you. Thanks for inviting me along.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you here. Tim, give us the background. Start by telling us a little bit about who you are, your studies, where you've practiced, just your little story.
Sure, absolutely. Look, I was one of the lucky ones who fell into speech pathology. So I started doing a degree majoring in English, thinking that I would be an English teacher. And that was kind of the goal. I was going to live happily ever after and teach children. But it turns out that perhaps it's not a fairy tale, that actually teaching is something that maybe I don't have the skill set for, that sort of crowd control of things. I was much more interested in language. And when I actually found out that speech pathology is more than very traditional articulation therapy or stuttering or lisp, but actually there's a whole world of vocabulary and story creation and sentence structure, it sort of worked. Like it just sort of clicked for me. So I started my studies at Flinders University. I'm based in South Australia, and just loved it. Loved absolutely every single day. As soon as I walked into the lecture theatre, I was just, oh, this is really interesting stuff. But I ended up with my first job working in education. That's where I kind of wanted to be, and working in classrooms with teachers, and loved that job. But then an opportunity came up in disability. So I jumped ship after about a year and started working with small kids in disability. And then, it was back in the fabled, beginning of the century where we could travel places. And I ended up spending 5 years in the UK, also working in central London, doing some really fantastic stuff, again with pediatrics. I've always been focused on developmental language, which I really, really love. Then after 5 years, I came back and then did some rounds again, went into hospital, back into disability school age, found myself in education again. And my longest job is now this one, where I work in a private practice and seeing kids one-to-one. But I suppose I've done lots and lots of things, but I've always really liked to be quite sort of direct therapy with kids, working really, really hard.
Oh, fantastic. What an amazing background and the stories you could tell.
Yeah, look, absolutely. It really is one of the best things. It's that, it's one of those, it's not the only career, but I think with a lot of allied health professions, you can actually have, once you've done sort of a few years at something, you either challenge yourself and move upwards, or you move into a completely different field, because there's so much you can do.
Yeah, wonderful. And in moving up and progressing your career, you've taken on a number of board positions. Would you like to talk to that?
Yes, sorry, yeah. So that's been fascinating. Again, an accidental fall into. So I was working in education and I took on a contract role as the principal speech pathologist for education in South Australia, and was doing a lot of work with adolescents and discovering, the difference between regular adolescents and adolescents who've actually grown up with a language disorder. And actually those two look very, very similar to one another, which is fascinating stuff. Anyway, I was doing a lot of work and pilot project working, and I think that's what drew the board of directors' attention to me as being doing something that was somewhat different. And I was asked to apply for a position on the board, and I rather blithely did that and sort of ventured into this amazing group of very, very inspirational people at the top of their careers, and throwing out ideas. And it was something completely different for me, Megan. So all of a sudden, we're looking at strategy. We've got a helicopter
governance.
Yeah, exactly. Like not just clinical governance, but like real corporate governance. How do you influence people? Advocacy, media, very, very high level conversations. And normally I would have sort of turned tail and ran, but I didn't realize that, of course, when you're sitting on a board, you're actually there with a group of people, and it's kind of like a team sport, really sort of having a bit of a go and looking at fascinating problems and fleshing it out, which is really different to my private practice, where I'm, one person in a room with a family. Yes. And, I feel like I'm the one that has to provide all of the answers. Now, all of a sudden I don't, I have to provide the questions. So it's been fascinating. Yeah. I joined the board in 2015 and just loved it. And when I fall into something that I love, I think like most allied health professionals, you research as much as you possibly can about it. So I decided to train myself up a little bit and really start working out, what is strategy, what is risk, how do we, do the best job that we possibly can do when we're in a board. Like, I've fallen into it. I'd actually probably better be pretty good at it because there's a lot of responsibility involved in it. So I did. I trained myself up, and I was very, very lucky to be voted onto an international board, which is called IALP, but it actually stands for the International Association for Communication Sciences and Disorders, which, again, then moving into that room was amazing. It's a board table of about 33 people, all of them world leaders in particular areas, so stroke recovery or multilingualism or autism or something along those lines. I got into that particular board because I'm actually representing a certain medium-sized societies and how they interact with and how we influence or work with agencies like the WHO. So all of a sudden, I'm like a kid in a candy store. Like, this is amazing. These kinds of conversations. And the wonderful thing is that I never really felt like I was the boss, if that makes sense. Like, I was really a bit of a team player and just completely different skill set. So since then, I've joined a few other things. I've joined an advisory board for one of the university speech pathology programs, which is fantastic. Love that. I also was invited to an Irish journal, the Advances in Communication journal, which is fantastic. I've never published a word in my life, but I can bring some of that clinical expertise as well. And I've just been appointed for a role on a not-for-profit board here in South Australia, which is all about active inclusion for people from a variety of lives getting into sport and recreation. And I can't wait to start walking into a room with people with different professions from me and doing problem solving stuff as well. So I love it. It really energizes me.
I love your mindset and your approach to taking on new challenges. That was so refreshing to hear you say, sitting around a board table, about asking questions, when so many of us are used to having experiences of boards of command and control. And so how refreshing to go, we're actually here to be problem solvers. That just opens up innovation, doesn't it? When you
it's amazing.
Shackles.
It energizes you, because what you're really doing is asking questions of each other, and you're sort of acting as a brains trust. So we have an amazing CEO in all of the organizations in which I'm involved. That's kind of the job. You want to get the best CEO that you absolutely can. And you act as a bit of a brains trust in terms of, this is something that we are seeing out there that we think we need to try, or this is my experience. It's just, we have big board meetings at Speech Pathology Australia, so we all get together, or used to, for about 2 days, and I am exhausted by the end of it. I just sort of go home and just smack onto the bed and just lie there for ages. No one talks to me for ages, but it's so energizing. I love it. I absolutely really love it.
Fantastic. I want to go down a little rabbit hole, question without notice. If a practitioner or therapist is listening and they're thinking, oh yeah, I think a board career could be for me, what's just a few early thoughts you've got for people if they're in preparation for that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, look, my advice really is get as involved with the organisation that you're interested in, so that you know what it is that's going on. Because if you step onto a board, you're actually taking on a huge amount of responsibility. If that organisation goes belly up, you're responsible for that, so it's not something to take on lightly. So I think that what you do is you get involved in that particular association. So if it's your professional organisation, if you're a health provider, then get involved in sort of the activities that are going on, meet people, become energized by all of those sorts of things. And I also think that it's a good idea to ask questions, get involved, social media presence, anything that's sort of going on, get involved. And if you like that and you're enjoying that energy, then I think maybe you should step up.
Yeah. Oh, great advice. That we're a humble lot, aren't we? And so many people have got this amassed wealth of knowledge and information, but who would want to hear from me? I don't want to be on camera. I won't do that. And you just think, come on, you can do it. Yes, there might be a naysay here and there, but they're not, as Brené Brown says, join me in the arena and then I'll listen to what you've got to say. We don't worry about naysayers.
Yeah, precisely.
Tell me about speech pathologists in Australia. come back to our home patch. We've got unprecedented growth and demand. We've got all sorts of challenges happening. What do you see from your role, both as practitioner and as president, the challenges being faced by pathologists in Australia?
It's such a good question, Megan. So around about 3 or 4 years ago, there was this massive expansion of university programs, and people were really worried about, oh my gosh, we're going to have an oversupply of allied health practitioners. This is not that long ago, like 2016, 2017, we were sort of thinking that actually there weren't going to be enough opportunities for students or early career or all of those sorts of things. And I think what's been fascinating is this, the society that we live in today has changed massively, particularly if you look at disability or aged care, for example. Like the Royal Commission into Aged Care, blew up, what it was that we were expecting of the role of how do we look after our senior Australians, And if we think about allied health as being different to primary health is about keeping people alive. You go to see a doctor, you're going to see a nurse, you go to hospital, when your life is in danger. But if we use the model that allied health makes life worth living, then all of a sudden with, this connectivity around social media, people are actually talking about what does make life worth living. And I think that that's driven the demand for allied health in a sort of like a not deliberate way or anything along those lines, but we've sort of started to work out now that mental health, aged care, disability, the way that we actually look after the most vulnerable people in our society is through a number of layers, but allied health has a real role to play. So all of a sudden there's been this massive demand of allied providers, and so that's had a couple of big challenges, I think. One of them in particular is now all of a sudden it's much harder to get allied health practitioners into rural and remote areas. And I'm even thinking about, like just not the metropolitan cities, like the second or third largest cities in states and territories are actually having huge difficulties recruiting. I look at Northern Territory and, the Northern Territory in particular is having real difficulties in terms of attracting and making sure that places are viable. And that's not even rural, that's just like a territory. So I think that's a massive problem because what happens is the demand is happening. The universities are in metropolitan centres. The placements tend to be very close to the universities. And so people are practicing there. And so there's a real demand for allied health practitioners there. And I think that's something that we really have to look at. I think the other one, and I think you're absolutely right by saying in Australia, is looking at who are Australians, where is our diversity within there, and looking at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representation within allied health is a massive, massive, massive need for. If we're going to be Australian, if we're going to be this continent, we actually need to see lots and lots of different people, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, languages, cultures, all of that sort of stuff coming into play. And for speech pathology in particular, what that means is we need to let go of some of that, this is the right way to communicate, that very white-centric, British-based...
White coat.
Exactly. White coat, I will be the practitioner that knows absolutely everything, exactly what you're saying. This is the correct way to be using language, where actually language doesn't have a correct way. It's really just about making sure that your message is being delivered in the way that you want it to be delivered and that you're able to transmit your thoughts and feelings correctly to other people. So this massive sort of turnaround, particularly for speech pathology, in terms of, well, what is the most important part of communication? How does identity tie in? And do we have people who represent those communication styles and identities within our profession? So this is why I love being on a board, because there is no answer to that, is there? But everybody will have a different opinion and different strategies. If we all agree that that's something that's vital, and I know with people that think that it's not, but if people think it's vital, there are all sorts of things that we need to do in order to progress our profession, progress all allied health professions actually, and respond to everything that's going on in Australia.
I've done this work for 14 years, and that time you're talking about 5 years ago, I was having conversations and doing lots of speaking and conferences and things, and talking to speech pathologists and OTs particularly, who would come and say to me, no one knows our profession. OTs, they think we're just grab rails. Speech therapists, they just think that we're stuttering. there's not enough clients, no one will pay for us. You know, dietitians were in this boat as well. And it was very much we don't want to market ourselves, but we're desperate. These conversations were just happening over and over again. And I think, wow, fast forward, we're now in a position of you can work where you want.
Yeah.
You can deliver telehealth services into Darwin, Alice Springs, Hobart, you know, wherever you've got a thin market.
Yeah.
And the choice is yours. It's almost flipped in a way. We've got to be careful now that you know, supply and demand issues cause really big constraints, don't they?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I suppose it brings up that whole notion of equity. So if there's a huge demand for professionals, you know, how do we make sure that everybody has access?
Yes. And what's happening at the university level, Tim? No doubt you're having those conversations. Are we gearing up to have a big recruitment drive of we want you? I'm thinking Uncle Sam, come and sign up for a career in allied health.
The universities, I can't really speak for any other profession, but for speech pathology, I mean, the universities are doing an amazing job. They are opening up a number of courses and backgrounds and making sure that, you know, they're recruiting, you know, the right people for the jobs. The thing that's really exciting is that, you know, Northern Territory is just about to start a program. Tasmania finally is getting their own particular program. So those areas which have been very hard to actually get speech pathologists into and keep them there, because otherwise, you know, you're relying on people to leave, say Tasmania, for example, go and study and then come back to Tasmania and work, which doesn't always happen, particularly if you're sort of newly out of high school. So I think, you know, the universities are doing a brilliant job. They are really, we've got some new professional standards. They've jumped on board with the identity of a speech pathologist. Really great stuff in terms of the curriculum. And everything's going really well because Australia is demanding more as well, and, you know, wanting more and recognizing more. It's just a matter of us keeping up with the population growth and the need for things to actually happen. So I can't fault the universities at all.
Good.
You know, and I can't fault society either. It's just one of those things we just have to work as smart as we possibly can.
Yeah.
In order to give service to everybody.
Yeah, and ride that peak of the wave and yeah, unprecedented growth. And tell me, from a personal, professional perspective, what's your vision for the speech pathology industry in Australia?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Very open question.
No, look, this is brilliant because I love it, because I don't have to have a vision, which is great, because, you know, like that would be the best autocrat thing, you know, like to sort of swat in and sort of go, well, this is what's going to happen. Was really, really happy. Sort of in 2016, Speech Pathology Australia commissioned a project which was actually looking at, the project was called SP 2030. So we employed a futurist who also had a background in speech pathology, and she was amazing. There was from January to August of that year, there was huge stakeholder consultation about when we hit 2030, what is it that we actually want to see? And a number of 8 aspirations actually came out from that discussion. And really it's what's actually that project has actually done, has actually driven all of our strategy and our strategic plans as we kind of go. So instead of actually having sort of like an actual strategic plan, we've just got these aspirations, we've got these amazing aspirations.
That's impressive.
So looking at sort of communities that have communication access, that services are for everybody, like we were talking about. So it's so ingrained in me, I can talk about it all the way.
Yeah, good.
Anybody can access, you know, wherever they are in the lifespan, that actually the clients themselves and the communities that they're in actually shape this type of service that they kind of want as well. That families and carers are really skilled and confident when dealing with communication disorders or swallowing difficulties. That speech pathologists actually start working a lot more with other professions as well. That sort of thing, and sort of taking up innovation, looking at technology. How is that? Not to sort of fear it, to do the old sort of, you know, 1990s style speech pathology, which, you know, terrifying. That's 30 years old now, you know. So, you know, like doing something new. 10, oh gosh, what's wrong with me? But also, and similarly, like having a workforce that actually is quite diverse, quite dynamic, you know, all of those sorts of things. So that project came up with all of these sort of aspirations, and that's kind of guided us. And particularly last year, when actually we had all of these sort of mini projects that we were going to do, we are going to deliver on, we were trundling along really, really nicely. February comes and actually that strategic plan just had to go out the window. But what we had left was this sort of idea about this is what our future needs to look like. This is what we need to have.
Yes.
And I'm being a bit cruel. I said like went out the window. It's not. We sort of had to reprioritize, but we had to really sort of focus on what is it as a core culture speech pathology is, and how do we go with that? And actually, look, I was terrified that we were going to lose members due to the pandemic because, of course, financial concerns, having to reevaluate, all of those sorts of things was actually going to happen. But in fact, we grew even more exponentially last year than we had in previous years, because we were using that kind of, we're going to be responsive, here's where the innovation is, here's how we do things in a diverse manner, here's how we reach out to other populations, that sort of thing. And our members got involved and we started building on it. So Megan, I'm just in this amazing privileged position to actually watch that kind of unfold and just be really sort of proud of what it is that our profession does.
I've just jotted down 2 notes: vision and tribe. I love the fact that you actually can recite your vision because it is true to what the word vision is supposed to mean. It's not framed on a wall somewhere. Like, that's fantastic. And the flexibility of being able to adapt to a global pandemic and still have, I don't know, it's more like an essence of truth, isn't it? The why of why your organization exists is what comes to the fore even more so.
Totally. I think that, look, if I think about the people who are graduating this year, they started their course, if it's a 4-year undergraduate course, they started in 2018, 2019. Again, that's not my strong point. But like, the world was so different then, and how much they've had to learn in order to practice, say, next year is just kind of massive. Like, we've all had to be incredibly agile. And it's not just the pandemic, it's, like all of the political, economic shifts, societal shifts, the sorts of things that we're talking about now. Just making it a different place that you graduate from to when you actually started your studies.
Definitely, which is why that tribe was the other point I wanted to touch on. In this uncertainty, we do gravitate towards who's like me, who's thinking like me, where do I feel that sense of reassurance and information and positivity from as well. Like, I think that group thinking is become more important and people are reaching for that. And what's your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think that that's exactly right. I think that what happened was people started to look at their own sort of sense of identity and sort of pull in towards it, right? Okay, so this is who I am, and first of all, we thought about our families, how do I keep my family safe? And then we thought about our communities, our greater families, our friends, all of that sort of stuff. Like, we did all of that personal stuff. How do I keep everybody, safe in this time of disruption? And then we looked at our professional identity as well, and we pulled in again. You're absolutely right. And it was fascinating. So something that wasn't working terribly well from my point of view, so not an official point of view, but 2018, 2019, in speech pathology, there are metropolitan-based groups, branches, right? So you might have, for example, the Queensland group, which actually has done incredibly well. Queensland's a massive example. They actually were doing incredibly well with 3 particular meeting points and meetings there, which is great. All of a sudden, this pandemic happens. We've got this thing called Zoom, which actually all of a sudden, it's not just these 3 hubs, it's everyone in the entire state. And because there was all of this concern, suddenly the numbers of people attending those meetings kind of went up. It brought people closer together, even though we couldn't be in a meeting room. And that's something that's Australia. Like Australia, you've got so many people in these sort of, capital cities. But actually 20% of our population are not in those capital cities. And it's about bringing those people in as well. So there's some advantages that happen.
Level playing field, regardless of location. I love that.
You could do it before, couldn't you? But it was basically about, say, 20 people in one room and then 3 people on a screen being ignored. There wasn't. So the word that I'm terrified of is the word hybrid. I don't like that. It doesn't make it an even playing field. It's hard work.
Of the 200 questions I've got in mind, there's 2 left I'll ask you so that this doesn't go for 3 days.
Sorry, a speech pathologist can talk. You should have known this.
Oh, look, so can marketers. And I'm just thinking, there's so many things I want to ask you. This has been such an interesting conversation. I want to ask you about your, I suppose, thoughts around speech pathologists integrating with other disciplines. So your thoughts around that, and raising the profile of the profession, and then maybe, I'm going to sneak a third one. I'll remind you what it is, and then your kind of advice, I suppose, to an individual working in the field. Shall we wrap that
Sure.
way?
Yeah, my gosh. Okay, which way are we going to go first? So
maybe start with raising the profile of the profession. What's your organisation doing on that front?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So in terms of sort of raising the profile of the profession, I think, again, you know how I was talking about those aspirations. One of the things that's really important is timely service. And I think timely is vital for all allied health, not just speech pathology. But if you have something that you need to access people who are able to make your life better straight away, right? One of the things that I find personally, being a pediatric speech pathologist, is that a parent will find that their child isn't talking quite the way that they were expecting was going to happen. And this is not a blame statement, because this is probably what I would do as well. They go to people that they trust, often a family member, or perhaps a GP or another professional. And the advice probably is, from very, very well-intentioned, don't worry, I know somebody who was a bit slow to talk and they kind of grew out of it. So just wait, like that sort of thing, which comes from a really, really lovely place, which is kind of like, everything's going to be fine. I want you to be happy. And that's true. That does happen. There are a percentage of kids who are, because of the law of average, some people are going to be below average, like 50% of us. And, some of them do actually catch up, but for quite a significant number of kids, that catch up doesn't take place.
Yes.
And I think that it's really important too. And I also think that when we say, oh, don't worry, it'll all work out, that black cloud just doesn't poof and disappear. Like,
no,
I think
we're missing an opportunity of neural plasticity.
I know, right? That's exactly it. And like, I love it if I actually have a family come in and see me, and actually, do you know what? When we do this sort of technique, actually we do get communication and things are going well. You don't need to see me anymore. Like with the workforce demand, I don't need to keep clients. If I can actually give you some really, really good advice that's going to make a huge difference to a child's life, wow, brilliant. Exactly what I'm here for, right?
Perfect.
So I suppose that's what I really want to see happen, that kind of, well, let's not wait and see. It's similar to sort of like, now if you get a cold, stay home from work, like, let's just do what's kind of sensible. So I want to eliminate that sort of wait and see. And so the profession itself are looking at, how do we make that happen? How do we target general practitioners and actually just have that really simple message, which is actually, it's not kind to wait. If you've got concerns, it'd be really, really nice to see. And not just for pediatrics, that's just my world.
Grab it early.
Anybody, in terms of anybody that comes in, because communication can happen at any particular point. The way that we communicate as a teenager or in the workplace is very different to how we communicate in kindy or reception or anything along those lines. So when you go to a doctor, if you've got a concern, you've actually had to get into your car and drive to the doctor's office. So there's obviously a concern. Let's do something about it. So that's what I would like to see happen, and it's something we're working really hard towards in the next year or so.
Oh, fantastic. And then in terms of speech pathologists working with other disciplines, what's your thoughts there?
Look, I think that that's vital, absolutely vital. And I think quite often, it makes sense that speech pathologists have had to try and work out what it is that we do, like what is our range of practice, because you have those kinds of conversations like you were having at your conference, that sort of, oh, people need to know what it is that we kind of do. But I also think that speech pathologists need to know what it is that other professions do as well.
Absolutely.
And I think psychology does this incredibly well. So psychology is in, organizational psychology is a branch of psychology, like that's working within business. But I also think that places like occupational therapy, physiotherapy, speech pathology, actually, it's time for us to be not moving into, but actually really understanding areas like engineering or coding or human resources, and not necessarily that sort of multidisciplinary traditional, we all stick together as allied health practitioners. But, like when it comes to diversity, I'm not just thinking about cultural diversity or background or linguistic diversity, but I'm also really interested in people who were engineers and then became speech pathologists.
Yeah.
People who have those different professions and mix those together and what you can kind of come out with. And if you don't have that background, well, then talking to other people about their profession. Like, I think speech pathology and law would actually merge together incredibly well, because so much of law is about telling a story, getting organized, and what does a contract actually really mean. Like, actually having somebody being able to translate legal documents into a way that's much more open for everyone, well, isn't that a better world? You know, so I think that we do, like, we're really working out what the profession is, but we do actually need to be moving into, and not just traditional health backgrounds. So many.
Interesting. I've just written down health storytelling, like in all its forms, communication.
Yeah, precisely.
And so, with that in mind, what would you say to any of the speech pathologists who are listening? Also, we've got lots of other disciplines and therapists listening as well. So, this is your opportunity. Go forth and do well. Message, Tim. What have you got for us?
Look, I honestly think that the best advice is to not listen to any advice that you don't deliberately ask for. So I actually think that, and the reason why I think that is because I think that everybody in allied health has a very, very different journey. And that's what I love about being in allied health. I quite often, this has been lovely. This has probably been the most I've spoken about myself in a long time, because I'm much more interested in other people's stories and their journeys, and, why are you working in this particular area and what motivates you about that sort of stuff. So everybody's really, really different. So I suppose don't listen to advice unless you actually really need it, because there's an area that you're really, really interested in. So I can really only tell you advice that has worked for me. And advice that's worked for me personally is actually watching people and learning from people in terms of how they interact with others and what they do. So I have learned something from every line manager that I've ever had in my life about how to manage, how to communicate with people in an effective way. Some of it good, and some of it kind of, I would probably avoid that sort of thing. And both of those things are equally good.
Useful.
And also learning from colleagues as well about how they interact with and all of that sort of stuff. I had a student last year, and I learned so much from that student about, how to sort of interact with, small kids, and, like, just having that ability to just stop and listen. She was amazing, but you need to have that ability, I think, to just sort of stop and kind of go, what's this person doing? Are they doing it well? Could I give that a bit of a go? Yeah. Which I think is, the only advice that has worked for me, real personally, that I think could work for most people.
That's so wise, not listening to advice.
What people have heard, but
no, it really is. You just, like, a light bulb went off when you said listening to all sorts of unsolicited advice. That's changing your lane too often, isn't it? Like, you didn't ask for that, so you're going to get shiny syndrome. My favorite saying, I just talk in sayings and pictures, but my favorite one is driving from Brisbane to the Gold Coast and getting off at every exit. Like, that would be like listening to every piece of advice. Just get in your lane and go. I love that. That's fantastic. Tim, is there anything else that you wanted to say or you wanted me to ask you that I haven't?
Oh, look, I think that we've proved that you and I could probably chat for absolutely ages, couldn't we, Megan?
Fun.
Not really. I think that personally, it's okay to not be having a brilliant day in allied health. I actually think a lot of allied health people are in it to improve the entire world, and sometimes we fall short. I think it's important that we're actually kind of kind to ourselves.
Yeah.
So one of the pieces of advice that I did listen to was every minute of therapy really, really counts. Like, you've only got an hour in a week maximum, and you've got to make as much change as absolutely possible. And I ran myself ragged, actually really sort of skipping the person that's actually in that room and really working on a program. And I think to be fair, I think I didn't interpret that advice in exactly the right way. I actually think that there is no such thing as a perfect therapy hour. But as long as you have got that intention that you're there to make somebody's life better, and you listen to them and hear them, then that's okay. That's a good use of an hour.
All coming from the right place, and hit the reset button.
Yeah. And allied health is a fun place to be in. If you can still take it seriously, and it can still be fun.
Yes. Good on you. So interesting talking to you. This has been really refreshing. It'd be just fascinating to be, oh, there's so many things, that international board with all of those amazing people, in one room and the brains trust of that. Oh gosh, that's a
Incredible.
conversation for another day. Tim,
Precisely.
we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much. And we'll include the link to the Speech Pathology Australia website if people want more information where you're watching this video. And yeah, thanks so much again for your time. It's been just a delight talking to you.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.